What's up, YouTube people? Shaggy the Writer, live in the library. Always happy to have you here. Just mad love going out to the r/alternate history hub Discord. All kinds of love to against the world. Gee, of course. Octawave probably will be joining us at some point, so shouts out to Octawave. Mad love, all kinds of love. Brittany and Rock, mad love to y'all. Don't watch continue. You need to subscribe to him. Um, per usual, we're coming in the library late, doing an evening reading, so we have limited time. I'm gonna go ahead and just dive into chapter 2 of the Three Musketeers. The antechamber of Monsieur Duvet. Monsieur de Trevec, as his family was still called in Gascony, or Monsieur de Trevec, as he ended up styling himself in Paris, had begun life exactly as D'Artagnan. He marched on the capital without a sou to his name, but possessed that wealth of audacity, shrewdness, and intelligence whereby the poorest and humblest Gascon gentleman often derives brighter hopes from his paternal heritage than the richest and loftiest nobleman from Perigord or Berry realizes materially from his. His insolent bravery, his still more insolent success at a time when blows were thick as hops, sped him to the top of that difficult ladder called court favor. He scaled it 4 steps at a time. Monsieur de Trevec was a friend of the reigning King Louis XIII, who, as well known, venerated the memory of his father, Henry IV. Now Monsieur de Trevec's father had served Henry IV with unfailing loyalty during the wars of religion. The monarch could not reward him in coin of the realm, for he was short of that commodity all his life long, and used to pay his debts with only a staple that he ever came cause to borrow, a ready wit. So King Henry of Navarre, having captured Paris and became King of France, being short of money as well as authorized the late Monsieur de Trevec to assume for arms a lion or passant upon Giles, in non-heraldic terms a golden lion walking and looking toward the right, with a right forepaw raised, and the motto Fidelis et Fortus, loyal and brave. This was of course a very great honor, but it scarcely made for creature comfort, so that when the illustrious comrade of Henry IV died, he left his son his sword and his motto only for inheritance. Thanks to this doubtful gift and spotless name that accompanied it, Monsieur de Trevec was admitted into the household of the young prince. There he made such good use of his sword and proved so faithful to his motto that King Louis XIII, one of the good swordsmen of his kingdom, was wont to exclaim,
"Had I a friend about to fight, I would advise him to choose me in the first place to support him, then Trevec, no, perhaps Trevec in the first place, then myself."
Thus Louis XIII had a genuine liking for Trevec, a royal and selfish liking, true, but a liking nevertheless. At that unhappy period it was important for the great to be surrounded by men of such stuff as Trevec. Many might take for a motto the epithet of brave, which formed the second part of Trevec's motto, but few gentlemen could boast that of loyal, which constituted the first. Trevec was of this small group, and high among them for a rare combination of virtues that were his. His intelligence, obedient and tenacious as a bulldog, and blindly passionate in his valor. Quick of eye and prompt of hand, He seemed to have been endowed with sight only to discern who pleased the king, and with an arm only to strike down the culprit, whether Besame, a maneuver, a porte, a melee, or a victory. In short, until now, Gervais had lacked nothing save a golden opportunity, but he had lain in wait for it and vowed to seize it by its 3 hairs if it ever came within reach. It did, and the sovereign appointed Gervais captain of his Musketeers, who in devotion or rather in fanaticism were to Louis XIII and his ordinaries had been to Henry III, and his Scots guards to Louis the um, the 11th. Okay, I had to double check which side the I was on there. Monseigneur Cardinal Duc de Richelieu did not lag behind the king in this respect. Seeing this impressive elite Louis XIII had recruited this second, or shall we say his first, the Cardinal, as actual ruler of France, determined to have his own private guard too. Thus there were 2 corps of guards, the king's and the cardinal's, and these 2 powerful rivals vied each other at attracting the most celebrated swordsmen, not only from all the provinces of France, but of all the foreign states. In their evening game of chess, cardinal and king argued the merriments of their respective soldiery, each vaunting a elegance and valor of his own. Officially, they condemned all duels and brawling, but privately they incited their henchmen to quarrel, deriving immoderate pleasure in victory or acute chagrin in defeat. For this statement we have the authority of a gentleman whose memoirs attest that he was involved in some few of these defeats, but in many more of these victories. Gervais knew how to appeal to and profit by his master's foibles. His skill in appraising these explains how he enjoyed the long and steadfast favor of a monarch whom history does not record as particularly faithful in his friendships. He paraded his musketeers before Armand Duplessis, cardinal and duke, with a defiant air that made his eminence's grey moustache bristle in impotent anger. Gervais had an admirable grasp of the war methods of his period. He realized that when soldiers could not live at the enemy's expense, they must live off their fellow countrymen. His men formed a legion of devil-may-care followers, quite undisciplined except in regard to their commanding officer. Loose in their ways, great drinkers, battle-scarred, His Majesty's Musketeers, or rather Monsieur de Trevaux, roamed the city. They were to be seen lounging in the taverns, strolling on the public walks, attending all civic sports and entertainments, shouting, twirling their mustachios, and rattling their swords. They took immense pleasure in jostling with the guards of Monseigneur Cardinal when they met. Then they would draw their swords in the open street, amid 1,000 jests, as though it were the greatest sport in the world. Sometimes they were killed, but they died certain of being mourned and avenged. Often they did the killing, but they were certain of not languishing in jail, for Monsieur de Trevaux was there to claim them. Obviously, then they praised their commanding officer to the skies. They adored him, and ruffians though they were, they trembled before him like schoolboys before the magister. Submissive to the least word, they were prepared to suffer death in order to wash out the slightest affront. Monsieur de Trevaux employed this powerful weapon on behalf of the king and friends in his first place, then, in the second place, on behalf of himself and his own friends. For the rest, no line in the memoirs of the period so fertile as memoirs, even those left by his enemies, acquiesces this worthy gentleman of acquiring personal profit from the cooperation of his minions. And heaven knows he had plenty among both writers and soldiers. Yet with a genius for intrigue which made him a match for the ablest intriguers, he remained a model of probity and honor. More despite grueling training and murderous duels, Monsieur de Treville had become one of the most gallant frequenters of the boudoirs, the most subtle squire of dames, and the most exquisite turner of pretty compliments of his day. Monsieur de Treville's triumphs in the lists of Venus were widely bruited as those of Bassompierre 20 years before, and that was saying a good deal. The captain of the Musketeers was therefore admired, feared, and loved, the state which constitutes the zenith of human fortune. Louis XIV absorbed all smaller stars of his court in his own vast radiance, but his father, Pluribus Impar, more accommodating, suffered each of his favorites to retain his personal splendor, and each of his courtiers to individual value. Besides the levees of the king and cardinal, Paris at the time boasted more than 200 others, minor ones but much frequented. Among these, Monsieur de Treville's levee was one of the most avidly sought after. In summer from 6 o'clock in the morning, in winter from 8 in the courtyard of his mansion in the Rue des Vieux Colombiers, resembled an armored camp. Groups of 50 or 60 musketeers appeared to replace one another in relays, so as always to present an imposing number. They paraded carelessly, armed to the teeth, and prepared for any eventuality. In quest of favors, the office-seekers of Paris sped up and down one of these colossal staircases, within whose space our modern civilization would build an entire house. There were gentlemen from provinces eager to enroll the musketeers, and flunkies in brilliant, multicolored liveries, bringing and bearing back messages between their masters and Monsieur de Treville. In the antechamber, on long circular benches, sat the elect, that is to say, those who were fortunate enough to have been summoned. Perpetual buzzing reigned in this room from morning till night, when Monsieur de Treville, in the adjoining office, received visitors, listened to complaints, and gave his orders. To review both his men and his arms, he had but to step to his window, much as the Louvre the king had but to step out on his balcony. The day d'Artagnan appeared at the Hotel de Treville, the assemblage was the most imposing, particularly for a provincial newly arrived from his distant province. True, this provincial was a Gascon, and at that period Gascons were reputed to be difficult to impress. Entering through the massive door with its long square studs, he walked into a midst of a troop of swordsmen carrying and crossing on each other as they passed, calling out, quarreling, and playing tricks on one another. Only an officer, that was hard to read, great or pretty woman could have moved through those turbulent, clashing waves of humanity. The young D'Artagnan, who advanced with beating heart through his tumult and confusion, holding his long rapier against his lanky leg, and keeping one hand on the brim of his felt hat, with a half smile of your provincial who wishes to cut a figure. Having got past one group, he breathed more easily, but he realized that people were turning round to stare at him, and for the first time in his life D'Artagnan, who had hitherto entertained a very good opinion of himself, felt ridiculous. Things were still worse when he reached the staircase to be confronted with the following scene. 4 musketeers were amusing themselves fencing. 3 were on the bottom step, the 4th some steps above them. He, naked sword in hand, prevented or attempted to prevent the 3 from ascending as they piled their agile swords against him. 10 or 12 comrades awaited on the landing to take their turn at this sport. At first D'Artagnan mistook these weapons for foils and believed them to be buttons, but he soon recognized by the scratches inflicted that every weapon was pointed as a needle and razor sharp. Initially, each scratch one of the fencers dealt an adversary. Both spectators and the actors themselves roared with laughter. The soldier temporarily defending the upper step kept his adversaries marvelously in check. The circle about the fencers grew denser as a fresh swell of candidates came into the audience. The rules of the game were that when a man was hit, he must yell his turn to another candidate, and that the man who hit him received an extra turn. In 5 minutes, the defender of the stairway pinked 3 men very slightly, one on the wrist, another on the chin, and a third on the ear, while he himself remained intact. This feat, according to the rules, won him 3 extra turns. However difficult it might be, or rather, however difficult D'Artagnan pretended it might be, for them to impress him, this pastime left him gaping. In his home province, a land where every man is a hothead, he had seen somewhat more elaborate preliminaries before dueling. The gasconade, that is, the impetuosity, courage, claim, and swagger of these 4 fencers eclipsed anything he had ever witnessed in Gascony. It was as though he had been transported into that famous realm of giants which Gulliver was later to visit, where he was to be so frightened. But D'Artagnan had not yet reached his goal. He had still to cross the landing at the antechamber. At the head of the stairs the Musketeers were not fighting. They were exchanging stories about women. In the antechamber they were exchanging stories about the court. On the landing D'Artagnan blushed. In the antechamber he shuddered. Gascony, his lively and vagrant imagination, had rendered him formidable to young chambermaids, and even sometimes to their young mistresses. But even in his most delirious moments he had never dreamed of half the amorous wonders or a quarter of the feats of dalliance which he had exposed here, with no detail omitted or attenuated, in connection with the loftiest names of the realm. But if his love of decency was shocked on the landing, his respect for the cardinal was scandalized in the attachment. There, to D'Artagnan's amazement, were loudly and boldly criticizing the policy of which the cardinal, blithely indifferent to the fact that so many powerful nobles have been punished mercilessly for merely attempting to learn something about it. What? Was it possible that the great man whom Monsieur d'Artagnan the elder had revered so deeply served as the object of ridicule to Monsieur de Treville's Musketeers? D'Artagnan could scarcely believe his ears as he heard these soldiers cracking jokes about his Eminence's bandy legs and his Eminence's crooked back. Some sang scurrilous lampoons about Madame d'Arionne, his mistress, and Madame de la Comble, his niece. Others formed parties and laid plans to annoy the pages and guards of Monsieur Duke and Cardinal. However, when by chance the king's name was thoughtlessly uttered amid those cardinalist jests, it was as though a gag had suddenly been clamped down on all these jeering mouths. The speakers glanced hesitantly about them, apparently doubting the thickness of the partition separating them from Monsieur de Treville's office. But a fresh allusion soon brought the conversation back to his Eminence, and then laughter waxed boisterous as ever, and a bright, cruel light was shed upon the least of his actions. "Upon my word, these fellows will all be imprisoned and hanged," D'Artagnan thought. He was terrified. "And that will be my fate too. I have been listening to them, and I have heard them. I shall undoubtedly be held as an accomplice. What would my good father say? My father who so earnestly counselled more respect for my Lord Cardinal. What would my good father say if he knew I was in the society of such heathens?" Needless to say, then, D'Artagnan dared not join in the conversation, but he was all eyes and all ears. jealous lest he missed the merest detail. Despite his faith in the paternal injunction, his tastes and instincts led him to praise rather than to blame the unheard of things he was witnessing. Although a stranger in the throng of Monsieur de Treves's courtiers, and making his first appearance in this antechamber, D'Artagnan was finally noticed. A flunkey went up to him and asked what he wanted. D'Artagnan gave his name very modestly, emphasized the fact that he was a fellow countryman of Monsieur de Treves, and requested a moment's audience. The servant, with a somewhat patronizing air, promised to transmit his request in due season. D'Artagnan, recovering from his first surprise, now had leisure to examine the persons and costumes of those about him. The centre of this most lively group was a very tall, haughty-looking Musketeer, dressed in so peculiar a costume as to attract general attention. He was not wearing the uniform cloak. It was not compulsory in those days of less liberty and more independence, but instead a sky-blue doublet, somewhat faded and worn, and over it a long cloak of crimson velvet that fell in graceful folds from his shoulders. Across his chest, from over his right shoulder to his left hip, blazed a magnificent baldric, working in gold and twinkling like rippling waters in the sun. From it hung a gigantic rapier. This musketeer had just come off guard, coughed affectedly from time to time, and complained of having caught a cold. That was why he was wearing a coat. And that was why he explained to those around him, speaking with a lofty air and twirling his mustache disdainfully. Everyone admired his gold-braided baldric. D'Artagnan more than anyone.
Well, after all, baldrics are coming into fashion,
Said the musketeer.
It was wildly extravagant of me, but still they're in fashion. Besides, a man must spend his inheritance somehow. Come, Porthos, don't try to tell us your baldric comes from paternal coffers.
Another musketeer piped up.
I know better. What? It came from the heavily veiled lady I met you with 2 Sundays ago, over by Port St. Paul. Why, no, by my honor, I bought it myself.
The man designated as Porthos protested.
On my faith as a gentleman, I paid for it out of my own purse.
Yea, said a bystander, just as I bought this new purse with the money my mistress put in my old one.
It's true, though.
Porthos insisted.
The proof of it is that I paid 12 pistoles for it.
The general wonderment grew, but the general doubt subsisted.
Didn't I, Aramis?
He concluded, turning to still another musketeer. The companion whose cooperation he invited offered a perfect contrast to Porthos. Aramis was a young man 23 years old at most, with a delicate and ingenuous countenance. Black, gentle eyes, cheeks rosy and doughy as autumn peach, and a tenuous mustache that marked a perfectly straight line over his lip. He seemed mortally afraid to lower his hands lest their veins swell up. He would pinch his earlobes from time to time to preserve their smooth, roseate transparency. Usually he spoke little and always slowly. He bowed frequently and laughed noiselessly, barring beautiful white teeth which he seemed to care for as attentively as he cared for the rest of his person. At his friend's appeal, he nodded affirmatively. Another musketeer changed the subject, addressing no one in particular.
What do you think of the chalet incident?
He inquired.
His esquire is telling the strangest tale. And what does this esquire say?
Porthos asked pompously.
He says he was in Brussels, and there he met Rochefort,
The Amédin of the Cardinal.
and guess what circumstances?
Well, Rochefort was disguised as Chaperon Frere. Damn his soul. Thanks to his costume, he was able to trick Monsieur de Lens, fool that he is.
Why, the legs is a fool, certainly,
Porthos conceded.
but this news, is it reliable?
I had it from Aramis.
You did?
Why, yes, Porthos, I told you all about it yesterday. Let's drop the subject.
Drop the subject.
Porthos thundered.
That's your opinion.
He drew a deep breath.
Drop the subject, indeed. A plague on you. You draw conclusions too quickly. What, that cardinal sets a spy upon a gentleman? The cardinal has the gentleman's letters stolen from him by a traitor, a brigand, a gallows bird. With the help of this scoundrel, and thanks to this correspondence, the cardinal has the head of Monsieur de Chalais severed skilfully from his shoulders. And you say, drop the subject. And under what pretext does the cardinal execute Chalais? Under a stupid pretext that Chalais plotted to kill the king and marry off Monsieur the king's brother to our queen. There were no word about this intrigue. Yesterday you unravelled it to our general satisfaction, and now, while we are gaping at the news, you say, let's drop the subject.
Very well, then, Aramis agreed. Since you wish it, let us discuss the matter.
Were I the esquire of poor Monsieur de Chalais,
Porthos blustered.
I would give that criminal Rochefort a pretty hard time for a minute or two.
Yes, I know, Aramis countered suavely. And you wouldn't get a pretty hard time of it yourself from the Red Duke.
Oh, the Red Duke! Bravo, the Red Duke!
Porthos cried, clapping his hands and nodding in approval.
The Red Duke, what a capital corner of mots you are, my dear Aramis. I shall make it my business to put the epithet in circulation all over the city, you may be sure. What a wit this lad Aramis is! What a pity you did not follow your early vocation! What a delightful abbé you would have made!
A temporary postponement, Aramis answered, picking imaginary dust off his sleeves. Some day I shall be a priest. Why do you suppose I am going on with my theological studies?
I a priest he'll be sooner or later.
Sooner? Another musketeer intervened.
Aramis is waiting for one thing before he dons the cassock hanging behind his uniform. What is that? For the Queen to produce an heir to the throne of France. That is no subject for jesting,
Porthos objected.
Thank God the Queen is still of age to bear a child. My Lord Buckingham is said to be in France.
The fleeting, sharp smile that accompanied this apparent simple statement left it open to somewhat scandalous interpretation.
Aramis, my friend, this time you were wrong. Your wit is forever leading you astray. If Monsieur de Treville had heard of you, was all ruined.
Are you presuming to lecture me, Poussin?
No,
A flash of lightning blazed in the eyes of Aramis, eyes habitually so placid and kindly. Well,
my dear Aramis, make up your mind. Are you to be an able or musketeer? Be one or the other, not both.
Porthos paused.
You know what Athos told me the other day? He said that you were all things to all men.
Aramis raised his arm violently.
Come, let us not get angry,
Porthos continued.
You know that Athos, you and I have agreed upon. Well, you visit Madame d'Aguignon to pay her court to you, and you visit Madame Dubois, Tracy, and you pay court to her too. And may I remind you that she is a cousin of Madame de Chevreuse, and rumor has it that you were quite far behind in the good graces of Madame de Bois Tracy.
Again, Aramis made an impatient gesture.
Good Lord, don't bother me to tell us about your luck with the ladies. Don't want to discover your secret. Everybody knows you for a model of discretion. But since you possess that virtue, why the devil not apply it when you speak of her Majesty as a queen? I do not care who plays fast and loose with king or cardinal, but the queen is sacred. If a man speaks of her, let it be with respect.
Aramis looked at his friend. He sighed.
Porthos, he declared, you are as vain as Narcissus. I have told you this before. I will tell you again. You know how I loathe moralizing. One like Athos does it. As for yourself, my fine friend, your Balderic is far too magnificent to chime with your philosophy. So, if I care to become an abbé, I shall do so. And meanwhile, I'm a musketeer, and as such I shall say what I please. At this moment, I am pleased to say that I find you very boring. Aramis, Porthos,
The comrades hastily interfered. Come now, gentlemen, stop. Porthos, look. Aramis, after all, you didn't mean it now. At the door of Monsieur de Treves's study flew open. A lackey stood in the doorsill. Monsieur de Treves will receive Monsieur d'Artagnan, he announced. The door being opened, those in the antechamber suddenly stopped talking. Amid the general silence, d'Artagnan walked across the room, entered the office, congratulating himself with all his heart at having so narrowly escaped the end of this extraordinary altercation. Ooh, here's chapter 2. Shouts out against the world. Gee. All kinds of love, my YouTube people. Mad love, Dr. Wave. Mad love to the r slash alternate history up Discord. Shouts out Marie. Shouts out Rakim. Shouts out Brittany. Shouts out Don't Watch Continue. And Dog Rose. And shouts out Renzo Flutes. And the rest of the Japanese gang. Man, we having a good time already. I'm feeling it. Are you feeling it, Mr. Krabs? Oh, let me see if we got any good questions today. It's not looking that way, but that's fine. So we are, for those of you who are like just tuning in, we are reading Alexandre Dumas, The Three Musketeers. Dumas is a really awesome writer. He was a black man in 1844 in France who wrote this. So just keep that in mind, because that's really awesome. Also, he's a Leo. His birthday just passed. And as you know, we like to coordinate the different readings with the different zodiac signs around here because it's fun. And also because it inspires everybody to get out here and read books. So this might be a behemoth, but it's definitely a good contribution to literature from Leos. And that's why we read it. Because d'Artagnan needs his story told. And we having fun with it. So if you want me to sub back to you, just let me know that you've subbed to me in the comment section. And if you want me to shout you out, just type in something in the comment section and I'll get to it here when I get a good break in. But we're going to go ahead, I guess, and get started with Chapter 3, The Audience. Though Monsieur de Treville was in a very bad humor at the moment, he greeted the young caller politely. D'Artagnan bowed to the ground, and in his sonorous Bavarian accent paid his profound respects. His southern intonation and direction reminded Monsieur de Treville of both his youth and his country, a twofold remembrance which brings a smile to the lips of any man old or young. But before bidding D'Artagnan to be seated, Monsieur de Treville stepped forward in the antechamber, waving his hand toward D'Artagnan as though to ask his permission to finish with the other business before he began with him. Standing by the open door, Monsieur de Treville called three names. At each name a voice gained in volume so that he ran the gamut between command and anger.
Arthus, Porthos, Aramis.
At his summons only two soldiers appeared, the musketeer of the golden baldric and the musketeer who would be an abbé. No sooner had they entered the door closed behind them. Though they were not quite at ease, D'Artagnan admired their bearing. They were at once carefree, dignified, and submissive. In his eyes they were his demigods and their leader, an Olympian Jove, armed with all his thunderbolts. D'Artagnan took stock of the situation. Two musketeers were here now, and the door closed behind them. In the hum of conversation the antechamber rose again, doubtless revived by the speculation that Porthos and Aramis were on the carpet. Monsieur de Treville was pacing up and down in silence, his brows knit, his covering the entire length of his office back and forth, 3 or 4 times, passing directly in front of the musketeers, who stood smartly at attention as if on parade. Suddenly he stopped squarely in front of them, wheeled round to face them, and surveying them angrily from top to toe.
Do you gentlemen know what the king said to me no later than yesterday evening? He demanded. Do you know, gentlemen?
There was a moment's silence, then one of them replied, "No, no, monsieur, we did not." "I hope that monsieur will do us the honor to tell us," Aramis suggested in his most honeyed tone as he made a deep bow.
He told me that from now on he would recruit his musketeers from among the cardinal's guards.
"The cardinal's guards?" Aramis asked indignantly. "But why, monsieur?"
Because his majesty realizes that his inferior wine needs improving by blending it with a better vintage.
The two musketeers blushed in the roots of their hair. D'Artagnan, completely in the dark about what was happening and considerably embarrassed, wished himself 100 feet underground. "Aye," Monsieur de Treville went on, growing angrier apiece.
His majesty was perfectly right, for on my word,
the musketeers certainly cut a sorry figure at court. Do you know what happened yesterday evening,
when his eminence was playing chess against the king? Well, I'll tell you. His eminence looked at me with a commiserating air, which frankly vexed me. He then told me that my daredevil musketeers, those daredevils, he repeated with an irony that vexed me even more, had required disciplining. Then his cat tiger eye cocked me, and he informed me that my swashbucklers had made a night of it in a tavern near Rue Ferron, and that a patrol of his guards, I thought he was going to laugh in my face, had been forced to arrest the rioters.
Monsieur de Treville paused for breath.
Morbleu, God's death, you must know something about it, he resumed. My musketeers arrested. You were among them. Don't you deny it? You were identified as the cardinal named you. But it's all my own fault, eh? It's all my own fault because it is I who choose my men. Come, Aramis, tell me why the devil you asked me for a musketeer's uniform when a cassock would have suited you so much better. And you, Porthos, of what use is that fine golden baldric of yours if all it does is hold up a sword of straw? And Athos,
By the way, where is Athos? Monsieur, Aramis explained mournfully. Athos is ill, very ill.
Ill, you don't say. What's the matter with him?
We are afraid it's
We're afraid it's the chicken pox, monsieur.
Porthos improvised, determined at all costs to take part in the conversation.
But we hope not, because it would certainly disfigure him. The pox? There's a cock and bull story, Porthos. Chicken pox. At his age? Now I know better. He was probably wounded or killed, I dare say. Oh, if only I knew what has happened to him.
Monsieur de Treville began pacing his office again, then turned fiercely on the culprits.
Sang Dieu, gentlemen. God's blood. I will not have my men haunting disreputable places. I will not have them brawling in the streets. And I will not have them fighting at every street corner. Above all, I will not have them make themselves the laughing stocks of Monsieur Cardinal's guards. These guards are decent fellows. They are law-abiding and tactful. They do not put themselves in situations to be arrested. And if they did, I swear it, they wouldn't allow themselves to be arrested. They prefer dying in their tracks to yielding an inch. Whereas self-preservation, flight, and surrender, he sneered, seem to be the watchwords of His Majesty's Musketeers.
During his long censure, Porthos and Aramis were shaking with rage. They would certainly have strangled Monsieur de Treville had they not felt it was great love he bore them that made him speak thus. Occasionally one or the other would stamp on the carpet or bite his lips to the quick or grasp the hilt of his sword so firmly that his hand paled. Their ordeal was worse because they knew that Monsieur de Treville's voice carried over into the antechamber. There, of course, the assembled Musketeers had heard Monsieur de Treville call for Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, and they judged from his tone of voice that he was exceedingly wroth. Dozens of eavesdroppers glued their ears into the tapestry covering the partition, shuddering at what they heard. Several glued their ears near the keyhole as they could, and by relay system repeated their leader's insults word for the benefit of the entire audience. And thrice from the door of the captain's office to the gate on the street, the whole mansion was seething.
So His Majesty's Musketeers are arrested by the Cardinal's guards, eh?
At the heart of the Monseigneur de Treville was as furious as any of his soldiers. Yet he clipped his words, whetting and sharpening them until they were so many stilettos plugged into the breasts of the culprits. Yes, 6 of the cardinal's
Guards arrest 6 royal musketeers. God's death, I don't know what I'll do now. I shall go straight to the Louvre, submit my resignation as the cardinal, as the captain of the Royal Musketeers, and apply for lieutenant's commission in the cardinal's guards. And morbleu, if he refuses, I will turn abbé.
At those last words, the murmur outside, which had been steadily rising crescendo, burst into a veritable explosion. Jeers, oaths, curses, and blasphemy rent the air. It was Morbleu here, sang Dieu there, Morts de tous les diables, upstairs and down all over the mansion, with God and Satan serving with their bodily parts as pegs upon which to hang the most violent imprecations. D'Artagnan looked vainly about him for some curtain behind which to hide. Failing to find any, he was seized with a wild desire to crawl under the table.
I beg your pardon, Captain,
Porthos flaring up.
but the truth is we were evenly marched 6-6. They set upon us treacherously and unawares, Before we could even draw our swords, two of our men were dead, and Arthos was grievously wounded. You know, Arthos tried to get up on his feet twice, and twice he fell down again. Meanwhile, we did not surrender. We were dragged forcibly away. Anyhow, before they got us in jail, we escaped. And Arthos? Well, monsieur, they thought Arthos dead, had left him in lying comfortability on the old field of battle. What was the point in carrying off a corpse? There's the whole story for you, devil take it, Captain. Nobody ever won all the battles he fought in. Pompey the Great lost the Battle of Pharsalia, I think, and King Francis the First, who was, so far as I have heard, was as good as the next man, suffered ignominious defeat in the Battle of Pavia. I have honor to assure you, monsieur, that I have killed one guardsman with his own. Oh, I have honor to assure you, monsieur, that I have killed one guardsman with his own sword. Aramis put in. The man was broken at the first belly. I killed him or stabbed him, monsieur. It is for you to choose which terminology you will prefer. Monsieur de Trevay appeared to be somewhat mollified. I don't know about all this, he admitted. From what I now hear, I suppose his Eminence was exaggerating. Profiting by the fact that his commanding officer seemed to have calmed down, Aramis hazarded, "I beg you, monsieur, not to say that Athos is wounded. It would be desperately unhappy if the king should hear of it. His wound is a very serious one. The blade passed through his shoulder and penetrated into his chest, so it is to be feared that—" Suddenly the door opened, the tapestry curtain was raised, and a man stood on the threshold. He stood at attention, his noble head erect, his shoulders squandered, his features were drawn, his face right. Athos! Athos! Monsieur de Trevay echoed in amazement. "The comrades told me you had sent for me, Captain," the newcomer said in a feeble yet perfectly even voice. "So I came here to report to you. What is your pleasure, monsieur?" With his regulation uniform, buttons a-shine, boots glittering, belted as usual for duty, every inch is sold. With a tolerably firm step, he advanced into the room. Monsieur de Trevay, deeply moved by this proof of courage, sprang to meet him. "I was telling these gentlemen that I forbid my musketeers to expose their lives needlessly," he explained. "Brave men are very dear to the king, and his majesty knows that his musketeers are the bravest men on earth. Your hand, Athos." And without waiting for the other's reaction, Monsieur de Trevay seized his right hand and pressed it with all his might. In his enthusiasm he failed to notice that Athos, mastering himself as he did, could not check a twitch of pain. Athos turned even whiter than before. The arrival of Athos created a sensation in the Hotel de Trevay. Despite the precautions his comrades had taken with their keep the wounds a secret, news of his condition news of his condition was becoming quite common. Athos rallied all his energy to struggle against the pain, but he was at length overcome and fell on the floor like a dead man. "A surgeon!" Monsieur de Trevay ordered. "A surgeon or the king's. Anyhow, find the best surgeon you can. God's blood, unless you fetch a surgeon, my brave Athos will die." At this, many of the musketeers outside rushed into Monsieur de Trevay's office, for he was too occupied with Athos to close the door upon them, and crowded around the wounded man. All this attention might have proved useless, had not the physician so urgently summoned a chance to be in the mansion. Elbowing his way through the throng, he approached Athos.
The musketeer was still unconscious, and, as all this noise and commotion was inconvenient, the first and most urgent thing the doctor asked was that Athos be removed to an adjoining room. Monsieur de Treville immediately opened the door and pointed the way to Porthos and Aramis, who carried off their comrade in their arms. Behind them walked the surgeon, and behind the surgeon the door closed. Then, momentarily, Monsieur de Treville's office, usually a place held sacred, became an annex to the antechamber, and everybody commented, harangued, vociferated, swore, cursed, and consigned the cardinal and all his guardsmen to all the devils. An instant after, Porthos and Aramis reappeared, leaving only the surgeon and Monsieur de Treville at their friend's side. Presently Monsieur de Treville himself returned. Athos, he said, had regained consciousness, and according to the surgeon his condition need not worry his friends. His weakness was due wholly to loss of blood. Then the captain of the Musketeers dismissed the company with a wave of his hand, and all withdrew save D'Artagnan, who did not forget that he had an audience, and who, with Gascon tenacity, sat tight.
Pardon me, my dear compatriot,
Monsieur de Treville said with a smile.
pardon me, but I had completely forgotten.
You can understand that. A captain is nothing but a father charged with an even greater responsibility than the father of an ordinary family. Soldiers are just big children, but I insist on the orders of the king, and more particularly the orders of the cardinal, being carried out. D'Artagnan could not help but smiling. Observing this, Monsieur de Treville judged that he was not dealing with a fool. Changing the conversation, he came straight to the point.
I love your father quite dearly,
He said,
what can I do for his son? Tell me quickly, for as you see, my time is not my own.
Monsieur, D'Artagnan explained, was leaving Tarbes and coming here. I intended to request you, in remembrance of the friendship you have cited, to enroll me in the Musketeers. But after what I have seen here during the last 2 hours, I understand what a tremendous favour it will be. I'm afraid I do not deserve it.
'Tis indeed a favour, young man, but perhaps not so far behind your hopes as you believe, or affect to believe. In all events, his Majesty's regulations are explicit on the point. I am sorry to have to tell you that no one is admitted into the Musketeers unless he has fought in several campaigns, or performed certain brilliant feats, or served at least 2 years in some other regiment of less favour than ours.
D'Artagnan bowed without replying. Disappointed as he was, the difficulties to be surmounted before becoming a musketeer made him all the more eager to achieve this. Monsieur de Treville fixed in a sharp, piercing gaze upon his compatriot as though he had read his innermost thoughts, and continued,
However, on account of my old comrade your father, I want to do something for you, as I said. Our youths from Iran are usually none too well off, nor have I any reason to suspect that things have changed much since I myself left the province. I dare say you haven't brought any too much money up with you.
D'Artagnan drew his hands up proudly. His expression indicated clearly that he accepted alms of no man.
Very well, young man, I understand,
Monsieur de Treville observed.
I know those airs. I myself descended upon Paris with 4 crowns in my purse, and I would have fought with anybody who suggested that I could not buy up the Louvre.
D'Artagnan drew himself even more proudly as he realized that, thanks to the sale of his nag, he was beginning his career with 4 crowns more than Monsieur de Treville had possessed in similar circumstances.
You ought, I say, to husband your resources, however great they may be, but you ought to also protect yourself in exercises befitting a gentleman. I shall write a letter today to the director of the Royal Military Academy.
I don't know why that was so hard to say.
He will admit you tomorrow at no expense to yourself. Do not refuse this small favor. our best-born and wealthiest gentlemen, sometimes solicited in vain. You will learn horsemanship, swordsmanship of all sorts, and dancing. You will make desirable acquaintances there, and you can call on me from time to time to tell me how you are getting along and whether I can be of future service to you."
D'Artagnan thought strange of the manners of the court, could not help feeling a certain coldness in this reception. "Alas, monsieur," he mourned, "my father gave me a letter of introduction to present to you. Now I realize how much it would help me."
"I am indeed surprised you should undertake such a long journey without that viaticum, that indispensable passport which is the sole reason we sauce poor Berenice possess."
"I had one, monsieur, and by God the finest I could wish for, but it was treacherously stolen from me." He proceeded to relate the adventure in the monk, describing the unknown gentleman with the minutest detail and with a warmth of truthfulness that delighted Monsieur de Treville.
"So very curious,"
Monsieur de Treville declared after a moment's reflection.
"You mentioned my name aloud, then?"
"Yes, monsieur, I confess I committed that impudence. And why not? A name like yours must serve
"Me as a shield on my journey. You will judge whether I availed myself of its protection."
Flattery was very current in those days, and Monsieur de Treville loved his taste as well as any king or cardinal. He could not restrain a smile of obvious satisfaction, but this smile soon disappeared. Returning to the adventure room,
"Tell me," he said, "did this gentleman have a slight scar on his cheek?"
"Yes, the kind of scar he might have a bullet had grazed him."
"Wasn't he a fine-looking man?"
"Yes, splendid."
"Tall?"
"Aye."
"A fair complexion, brown hair?"
"Yes, monsieur, that's right, that's the man. How do you know him so well?" "If ever I find him again, and I will find him, I swear it even in hell."
"He was waiting for a lady?"
"Yes, and after he'd talked to her for a few moments,
"Do you know what they talked about?"
he gave her a box, and told her it contained her instructions, and admonished her not to open it until she reached London."
"Was this woman English?"
"He called her milady."
"It is he! It is he!"
Gervais murmured.
"I thought he was still at Brussels."
"Oh, monsieur, if you know who the man is, pray tell me who he is, and where he comes from. This would be the greatest favour you could possibly do me. If you will, then I shall refuse you from all of the promises, even that of helping me join the Musketeers eventually. That's only thing I ask of life is to avenge myself."
"Beware of trying any such thing, young man,"
Gervais cautioned.
"On the contrary, if you ever see him on one side of the street, make sure to cross to the other. Do not throw yourself against such a rock, it would smash you like glass."
"That will not prevent me, if I ever meet him, from—" Suddenly Gervais eyed D'Artagnan suspiciously. Treachery might well lurk behind that fierce hatred the young traveller possessed for the man who had stolen his father's letter, or so he said. Besides, this theft seemed an improbable thing at best. Might not his Eminence have sent this youth to set a trap for Gervais? Wasn't this pretended D'Artagnan an emissary whom the cardinal sought to introduce into Gervais' household so that he might be close to him, win his confidence, and then ruin him? Had the cardinal played this trick 1,000 other times? Looking at D'Artagnan ever more searchingly than before, Monsieur de Treville was but moderately reassured by his expression, alive with astute intelligence and affected humility.
"I know he's a Gascon,"
He mused.
He may be as much of a Gascon for Monsieur Cardinal as he is for me, but I shall test him.
His eyes fixed upon D'Artagnan's, he spoke slowly.
My boy, your father was an old friend and comrade. I believe this story of the lost letter to be perfectly true, and I should like to dispel the impression of coldness that you have remarked in my welcome. Perhaps the best way to do so would be to discover you a novice, as I once was myself, the secrets of our policy today.
He then went on to explain to D'Artagnan how the king and cardinal were the best of friends, and their apparent bickering was only a stratagem intended to deceive fools. Monsieur de Treville was unwilling that a compatriot, a dashing cavalier, and a youth of high mettle, should be duped by such artifices and fall into the snare, as so many others had done before him to their own ruin. He assured D'Artagnan of his devotion to both of these powerful masters. He insisted that his most earnest endeavour was to serve both the cardinal and king. His Eminence, he added, was one of the most illustrious geniuses France had ever produced.
Now, young man, rule your conduct accordingly. If for family reasons, or through friends, or through your own instincts, even you entertain such enmity for a cardinal as we are constantly discovering, then let us bid each other adieu. I will help you as much as I can, but without attaching you to my person.
There is a long pause.
I hope that my frankness will at least make you a friend,
Monsieur de Treville said at last.
because you are the only young man to whom I have ever spoken to like this.
Treville was thinking, the cardinal knows how bitterly I loathe him.
If he has sent this young fox upon me, he cannot have failed to indicate the best means of winning my favour. This spy, therefore, has been primed to rail at Richaud for my benefit, and my suspicions are well founded. My hypocritical protestations to loyalty to Richaud should move this crafty youth to loose a torrent of abuse against his eminence.
But Monsieur de Treville's calculations proved to be wrong. I came to Paris with just the intentions you advised me to harbour, monsieur, he replied candidly. My father warned me to follow nobody but his Majesty, Monsieur Cardinal, and yourself, whom he considered the three leading misogynists in the realm of France. Monsieur d'Artagnan the elder had indicated only Louis XIII and Rochelle, but his son thought the addition of Monsieur de Treville would do no harm. I have the greatest reverence for the cardinal, and the most profound respect for his actions, he continued. So much the better for me, monsieur, if, as you say, you are speaking to me frankly, because by doing so you pay me the honour of sharing my opinion. So much worse for me if you mistrust me, as well you may, because then I am damning myself in your eyes for speaking the truth. Still, I trust you will not esteem me any less for my frankness, since your esteem is the thing I hold dearest in life. Monsieur de Treville was overwhelmed with surprise. Such penetration and sincerity won his admiration, but did not wholly dissipate his suspicions. The more this youth exiled others, the more dangerous he was. If Treville misjudged him, nevertheless he persisted, and pressed D'Artagnan's hand, saying,
You are an honest lad, but I at present can do for you no more than what I just offered. The Hotel de Gervais will always be open to you. In time you will have a chance to ask me at all hours. Consequently, you will be able to take advantage of all available opportunities, and you will probably achieve more than what you desire.
You mean, monsieur, that I have proved myself worthy? Said D'Artagnan, with the familiarity of Gascon to Gascon. Well, you may rest assured that you will not have to wait long. Whereupon he bowed to take his leave. as if he considered the future so much putty in his hands to shape as he willed.
Wait!
Monsieur de Trevay laid a hand on his arm.
I promised you a letter to the director of the Royal Academy. Are you too proud to accept it, my lad?
No, monsieur. I will guarantee this letter will not fail like my father's. I will guard it so carefully that I swear it will be delivered. If anyone attempts to take it from me, may God have mercy on his soul. Smiling at this extravagance, Monsieur de Trevay left D'Artagnan and the embouchure of the window, where they had been chatting, and moved to his desk to write the promised letter. While he was doing this, D'Artagnan, with nothing to occupy him, drummed a tattoo on the window pane, and amused himself by watching the Musketeers as they left the building, one by one, until turning the corner they vanished. The letter finished, Monsieur de Trevay sealed it, rose, and advanced toward D'Artagnan, who stretched out his hand to receive it. Suddenly, to Monsieur de Trevay's amazement, his protege turned crimson with fury. "God's blood!"
What's the matter?
D'Artagnan leapt across the room, crying, "God's blood! He'll not slip through my fingers this time!"
Who?
"The thief!" D'Artagnan shouted as he rushed from the room. "The traitor! Coward at last!"
Devil take that madman, Monsieur de Trevay grumbled. Unless failing in his mission, he is making a highly strategic escape.
Woo! Shout out Octawave. Octawave in the building. Mad love to you. All kinds of love to against the world G as well. Yes, I love the fact that I'd be shouting you up, shouting you out. And you pretty much always comment after I shout you out. So, I don't know if I've got the notifications on for your channel, Octawave. I will definitely check on that momentarily. If you, so that way when you want to start really getting into this stuff, I would like every video. Because I love my fans. I love my YouTube peoples. Mad love going out also to the r/alternate history hub Discord. We've got about 15 minutes until I get kicked off this computer by the automatic timer. And we have a fairly short chapter ahead of us. Yeah, Octawave, I'm actually on Discord. On a couple of them. Don't Watch Continue got me onto Discord, so that's kind of dope. But I do one for the Alternate History Hub, which is a YouTube page on here that's really awesome, and the community on Discord is quite hilarious. And they usually show up at these events. So even though none of them likes the fact that I do this by zodiac signs, I find their reactions hilarious. Oh man, I don't know. Seven pages in 13 minutes is going to be kind of tricky. We'll go into it. But yeah, if you're on Discord, Octawave, just let me know if you want me to join any of your pages or anything. Because I usually do it for no other reason than to help people pad their stats a little bit. Chapter 4. Of Athos, his shoulder, of Porthos in his baldric, and of Aramis in his handkerchief. Mad with anger, D'Artagnan crossed the office in 3 leaps, and was darting toward the stairs, expecting to clear them 4 at a time, when in his furious rush he collided head foremost with a musketeer who was coming out of one of Monsieur de Treves's private rooms. As D'Artagnan butted the man's shoulder violently, the other uttered a cry, or rather a howl. "Excuse me," D'Artagnan said, starting to start off in a hurry again. "Excuse me, but I'm in a hurry." He had scarcely gone down the first step when a hand of iron seized him by the belt.
"Oh, you're in a hurry, eh?" said the musketeer, blanching. "You're in a hurry, so you run into me and you say 'excuse me,' and you expect me to take it. Not at all, my lad. You heard Monsieur de Trevaux speak somewhat cavalierly to us today, and you think we can take all sort of it from anybody. Let me set you right, comrade. You are not Monsieur de Trevaux."
D'Artagnan recognized Athos, who, having had his wounds dressed by a doctor, was on his way home. "I assure you I did not do it on purpose," D'Artagnan apologized. "As it was an accident, I said excuse me. I should think you would think that's a sufficient apology. Once more I say I'm in a very great hurry, on my honor, and I'll not say it again. Let me go, please, let me go about my business."
"Monsieur, you are far from courteous," Athos replied, loosening the hold of him. "It is obvious that you are newly come from some remote province."
D'Artagnan had already gone down several steps, but at this remark he stopped short. "Morbleu, monsieur," he growled. "I may come from a distance, but I warn you, you are not a man to give me lessons in deportment." "Perhaps, if I were not in such a hurry, and if I were not chasing somebody—" "Monsieur the gentleman in a great hurry. You can find me again without running after me, if you see what I mean." "And where, if you please?" "Near the Carmes du Show. You know, the Carmelite Convent." "About what time?" "About noon." "About noon. Very well, I shall be there." "Try to be punctual, because if you make me wait till 1/4 past, I shall cut off your ears as you run." "Good, I shall be there at 10 to 12." And D'Artagnan set off as though borne by the devil, confident that he would overtake the man of Meung whom he had seen sauntering down the street. But at the main gate he saw Porthos talking to the soldier on guard. Between the two of them there was just room for a man to pass. D'Artagnan, thinking he could whisk through, shot forward like an arrow between them. Unfortunately, he had not reckoned with the wind. As he was about to pass, a gust blew the portly Musketeer's long coat, and D'Artagnan landed right in the middle of it. Porthos doubtless had his own reasons for not wishing to abandon his essential part of his costume. For instead releasing a flap he held in his hand, he pulled it toward him. D'Artagnan was thus rolled up inside the velvet by a rotary movement attributable to the persistency of Porthos. Hearing the Musketeer swear, he tried to emerge from under the cloak which was blinding him, and sought to find his way from under its folds. Above all, he must avoid marring the virgin freshness of the baldric Porthos set up such a store by. Opening his eyes timidly, he found his nose glued between the Musketeer's shoulders, flat against the baldric. Alas, like most things in this world which have the appearance in their favor, the baldric was aglitter with gold in the front, but behind it was an ordinary buff. Vainglorious as he was, Porthos could not afford a baldric wholly of gold. That would have been at least one half of it. This explained the necessity of the cold he had complained of and the urgency to keep his cloak sported.
"Very blue, you must be crazy to cross into people this way,"
Porthos grumbled as D'Artagnan kept wriggling behind him. "Excuse me," said D'Artagnan, appearing from behind the giant's shoulder, "but I'm in a great hurry. I was running after somebody, and—"
"Are you always so blind when you run, I suppose?"
Wait, I was doing it more James Bondish. Ooh, definitely. Octaway, just saw your question. Definitely want to read that in the future. That's a dope book. It's been so long. No, D'Artagnan answered, somewhat nettled. In fact, thanks to my eyes, I can see a good many things other people don't. He didn't care for whether Porthos understood the allusion or not. At all events, the musketeer gave free rein to his anger.
Monsieur, I warn you, you stand an excellent chance of being disemboweled if you tried pushing a musketeer about.
Disemboweled, that's strong language, monsieur.
It befits a man accustomed to looking his enemies in the face.
Huh, that's no lie, D'Artagnan laughed. Certainly you wouldn't show them your back then. And enchanted with his wit, he went off, still chuckling over the semi-golden baldric. Porthos, foaming with rage, was about to fall upon him. Later, later, D'Artagnan admonished, when you haven't your cloak on.
At 1 o'clock, then, behind the Luxembourg.
Very well, then, it's 1 o'clock. D'Artagnan turned the corner of the street, looking carefully ahead, up and down across the street. Slowly, though the stranger had walked, he still must have outdistanced D'Artagnan when, while the Gascon was being detained by Athos and Porthos, or he must have entered some house near by. D'Artagnan inquired the passers-by if they had seen a man answering to his enemy's description. He walked down to as far as the ferry, came up along the Rue des Seines and across the Creux Rouge, but he found nothing, absolutely nothing. Yet this wild goose chase helped him in sense, for as fast as the beads of sweat ran down his forehead, his heart began to cool. He retraced all the events that had occurred. They were numerous yet ill-omened. He scarcely said 11 o'clock in the morning, and yet in 2 short hours he had made 3 capital blunders. In the first place, he had disgraced himself in the eyes of Monsieur de Trevaux, who could not but consider his withdrawal somewhat cavalier. In second and third, he had invited dangerous duels with 2 men each capable of slaying 3 D'Artagnans. With 2 musketeers, in short, with 2 of those heroes he admired so passionately that they throned in his mind and heart all over others. A sad plight. Short of being killed by Athos, he was naturally unperturbed by Porthos. But the hope is the last thing a man will relinquish. D'Artagnan hoped amongst hope that he might survive both of these duels, even though grievously wounded. Should this happen, he would profit by following a homily delivered by himself to himself. What a lunatic I was, and what a clod I am! Poor brave Athos, who was wounded in the shoulder, and I was fated to butt against it. Why did he not kill me then and there? God knows. He had ample cause to do, or must have caused him a fearful pain. As for Porthos, dear old Porthos, why, running with him was the drollest thing that has ever happened to me. At the thought the youth could not help roaring with laughter, but he looked very carefully about him to make sure lest his solitary laughter was unaccountable to any passer-by, which might be considered offensive. Oh man, 4 minutes. Funny it was surely, but it doesn't make me any less of a drivelling idiot. People simply don't go charging into others without warning, and they don't dive under their cloaks to search for what isn't there. Porthos wouldn't have certainly excused me if I hadn't alluded to his curse, Balderic. To be sure that I didn't refer to it specifically, I'm sure it's subtle insinuation and hilarious innuendo. Oh, curse Gascon that I am, I would crack a joke as filled kernels of hell. His Marspeni continued to talk to himself with all the amity he believed to be in his due. Look here, D'Artagnan, my friend, if you escape what seems to me highly improbable, you must learn with perfectly polite in the future. You must henceforth be admired and cited as a model of urbanity. To be manly and obliging does not make a man a coward. Look at Aramis. He is amiability and grace personified. Well, has anyone ever dreamed of calling him a coward? Certainly not, and I vow from now on I shall not take him as a model in everything. Ah, here he is, walking forward and soliloquizing. D'Artagnan had arrived a few steps from Hotel d'Aiguillon, and found by Aramis at the main gate chatting gaily with 3 gentlemen of the royal guards. Aramis, for his part, perceived D'Artagnan too, who remembered that the youth had witnessed the angry scene with Monsieur de Trevaux that morning. He felt loath to welcome one who observed the captain rebuking his musketeers, so he pretended not to see him. D'Artagnan, on the contrary, was still full of his plans of conciliation and courtesy, so with a deep bow and a most gracious smile he approached the quartet. Aramis bowed his head slightly, but did not smile. The 4 soldiers immediately broke off their conversation. D'Artagnan at once perceived that he was intruding upon them, but he was not familiar enough with the manners of the fashionable world to know how to extricate himself gallantly from a false position. Here he was mingling with the people he scarcely knew, and interrupting a conversation that did not concern him. He was racking his brains to find the least required means to retreat, when he noticed that Aramis dropped his handkerchief, and by doubtless mistake had placed his foot over it. Here, thought D'Artagnan, was a favourable opportunity to make up for his tactlessness. With the most polished air he could summon, he stooped down and drew the handkerchief from under the Musketeer's foot, despite the efforts Aramis made to keep it hidden. Holding it out to Aramis, he said, "Here, monsieur, is a handkerchief, which I believe you should be sorry to lose." Indeed, the handkerchief was richly embroidered, and one of the corners was torn up and cast. Aramis, blushing excessively, snatched it away from the Gascon's hand.
My most discreet friend,
One of the guards said to Aramis.
will you persist in saying that you are not on good terms with Madame de Bois Tracy, when that charming lady is kind enough to lend you one of her handkerchiefs?
Then Aramis shot D'Artagnan as a declaration of mortal enmity. Then, resuming his usual suave air, "You are in error, gentleman," he answered. "This handkerchief does not belong to me. I cannot imagine what maggot inspired monsieur to hand it to me rather than to one of you. As proof of what I say, here is mine in my pocket." Whereupon he produced his own handkerchief, which was very elegant too, and of fine cambric material, was expensive at the period, but it lacked embroidery and a crest, and he held it up. They could all see it was ornamented with a single cipher, its owners. This time D'Artagnan was so hasty. He perceived his mistake, but the others refused to be convinced by the Musketeer's denial. Ah, man, it's only a minute left till the library kicks me off, and I'm not going to finish the last page and a half of this chapter. But I know what happens. Oh, oh man. Just all kinds of love going out to Octawave. Mad love to Against the World. Gee, all my peeps over there on Discord. Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. When is Anthony Burgess's birthday? I got 30 seconds. It's mad love for Octawave. Got all kinds of love for you guys showing up and showing out like you do. And I don't think I'm going to have time to answer because my phone is being slow. Anthony Burgess' birthday. Oh well. Thank you so much for showing up. I hope you guys have a wonderful evening. One love, faux fake, NFA.